One of the most powerful politicians in the state's facing a runoff to try and keep his seat in the state house.
Fox 4's Paige Ellenberger live this morning with that story. Good morning.
Good morning, Brandon and Lauren. And this was truly such an interesting race to watch play out yesterday as Speaker Dade Phelan is in hot water with some members of the Texas Republican Party. The two-term incumbent struggled getting the votes that he needed yesterday. Last summer, he was at odds with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick over how to cut property taxes in the state. Phelan also oversaw the House vote last year to impeach Texas AG Ken Paxton on corruption charges. Paxton, though, of course, was acquitted. The Attorney General and former President Donald Trump threw their support behind Phelan's challenger, hardline conservative David Covey. Last night, Phelan finished second behind Covey in the race for House District 21, which represents parts of southeast Texas.
Hello guys, Adam is back again, so this is what just happening right now. Something significant just happened in Texas, exposing a crack in Trump's firewall, the state he's always treated as guaranteed MAGA territory. If Texas is no longer reliably red, then Trump has no safety net, and he's vulnerable everywhere. Tonight, there are no statewide races in the primary runoff election, but voters in several parts of the state are making decisions tonight that could have a lasting impact all across Texas. Now, the race with the highest stakes involves Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan, and he is declaring victory tonight. Here's a look at the results. He faced a strong challenge from David Covey in District 21 in southeast Texas near the Louisiana state line. Now they've counted almost all of the votes. You can see Phelan is ahead by a very slim margin, 51% to 49% at just a couple of hundred votes separating the two men.
Good evening from 12 News. We are coming on the air just after 9:20 here tonight with breaking news from your election headquarters. In a narrow victory, Dade Phelan has been re-elected to his seat in the Texas House to represent District 21. I'm Jordan Williams.
And I'm Brenda Matuti. 12 News called the race for Speaker Phelan just moments ago. Take a look at the new numbers coming in the last few minutes. Phelan coming out with the lead with 51% of the votes. In total, he garnered 12,813 votes. That makes up 50.7% of the votes compared to Covey's 12,447. It was a vote margin of 366 votes. That's what this race came down to.
And it really came down to the votes from Jasper County tonight. We were waiting for them to come in.
It is tight. The most expensive Texas House race in state history, $8 million spent on TV ads. 366 votes made the difference. This has been a bad year if you're an incumbent lawmaker, with Phelan's notable exception, because polling is starting to show something that shouldn't be happening in a state like Texas. Polling is starting to show that Trump's support in Texas is not as solid as people think. Polling is starting to show that Texas voters, even Republicans, are flirting with alternatives. Polling is starting to show that some traditional Republican voters in Texas are questioning whether Trump is actually good for the Republican Party. And real election results are starting to confirm what the polling is saying, because races that should be blowout Republican wins are turning into competitive contests. Districts that should be locked down for Trump's party are swinging dramatically in the other direction, and top Texas Republicans are starting to say it out loud.
As we come on the air to start the week, we are exactly 99 days away from the election. You might say Donald Trump has 99 problems, and the midterms are one of them. And that's even according to his own advisors and allies. I'm going to show you some of the new numbers, including a special look at why both parties agree on one thing. If the elections were held tonight, Democrats would be in the lead position to retake power. So on the one hand, 99 days is still an eternity in politics. But on the other hand, both parties, their candidates, even some Trump advisors, are absorbing that reality and reacting. Now, we begin, though, with the related fact that Donald Trump continues to bleed support from his own base. This is different, I'll just tell you, from the midterm projections, because that has to do with who will actually turn out and what else will happen. And we're going to get to that with some very special guests tonight. But our lead story is the toxic combination of Donald Trump's ongoing governing problems. The high prices he hasn't stemmed, an Epstein scandal that won't go away even with Republicans controlling subpoena power, and now a war that continues long after Donald Trump said it would be done.
Texas Republicans are starting to publicly blame Trump for losses. Texas Republicans are starting to say that Trump's hand-picked candidates underperformed. Texas Republicans are starting to question whether Trump is actually a political asset or whether he's become a liability. And that's not supposed to happen in Texas. That's not supposed to happen in a state that's supposed to be Trump's fortress. But it's happening. And that signals something significant about Trump's political position heading forward. Because if Trump is losing support in Texas, if Trump is becoming a liability even in deep red states, then what does that mean for the rest of the map? What does that mean for purple states? What does that mean for suburban areas that were already skeptical of Trump? What does that mean for Trump's ability to actually win elections going forward? And those are serious questions. Those are questions that should terrify Trump, because Trump's entire political brand is built on the idea that he's unstoppable. Trump's entire brand is built on the idea that he can dominate in places like Texas. And if that brand is cracking in Texas, then the entire foundation of Trump's political power is under threat.
For a decade now, Donald Trump has made it clear to Republicans, support him or he's going to come after you. But here's how rough the political landscape is for him right now. Trump's own political operation is giving Republican candidates the green light to distance themselves from the president. That is according to new reporting from my colleagues Vaughn Hilliard and Jake Taylor. It comes as there is new panic about the party in the midterms. Data from one GOP political group shows about 1 in 5 reliable Republican-based voters are at risk either of staying home or of actually voting for a Democrat. We're talking about people who would generally vote and vote Republican in a midterm election, which is why Republican operatives are calling that number scary.
Let's look at the specific evidence that shows Trump's support in Texas is eroding, because this isn't speculation. This isn't opinion. This is data. This is polling. This is election results. And the data is clear. Start with the internal GOP polling, because Republican operatives in Texas have been taking internal polls to understand what's happening with their base. And those polls are showing something surprising. Those polls are showing that when Republican voters are given a choice between Trump and other Republican leaders like Ron DeSantis, a significant portion of GOP voters prefer DeSantis. Not overwhelmingly, not by huge margins, but enough to be noticeable, enough to be alarming if you're Trump. 43% of Republican voters in that internal poll preferred DeSantis over Trump's 32%. That means roughly 1 in 3 Trump supporters in Texas are open to an alternative if one is offered. And that's not supposed to happen in Texas. Trump is supposed to own Texas Republicans. Trump is supposed to have total loyalty from the Republican base, but the polling shows that's not true. The polling shows that Texas Republicans are open to alternatives. The polling shows that Trump's base is not as solid as everyone assumes, and that's a significant warning sign. And then there's the overall favorability data, because statewide polling shows that 55% of all Texans view Trump favorably, which sounds good, which sounds like Trump is still popular. But dig deeper, and the story changes. Among Republicans, Trump's favorable rating is 90%. Which is very high, but it's not 100%. It is not universal. Which means that even among his supposed base, 1 in 10 Republicans view Trump unfavorably. And there's another subset that views him favorably, but is open to alternatives. And meanwhile, other Republican leaders are also polling well. Governor Greg Abbott has an 82% favorable rating. Senator Ted Cruz has a 78% favorable rating, which means that Texas Republicans have other people they trust and support besides Trump. Which means that if those people decided to offer an alternative to Trump, they would have a base to build on, which means that Trump doesn't have a monopoly on GOP loyalty in Texas, even though he's supposed to. And then there are the actual election results. Because there's a special election or down-ballot race in Texas where something shocking happened. A district that backed Trump's party by double digits swung roughly 31 points toward the opposition. 31 points. That's a massive swing. That's the kind of swing that suggests that something fundamental has shifted in how voters are thinking about Trump's party. And the analysis of that swing shows that it's coming from church-going voters and suburban voters who used to back Trump but who are now backing away. And those voters are making clear what their concerns are. They're concerned about Trump's legal troubles. They're concerned about January 6th. They're concerned that Trump is focused on personal vendettas instead of actually governing. They're concerned that Trump is making their party look chaotic and unserious. And they're deciding that they like Republican policies, but they don't like Trump as the messenger. They're deciding that they want judges and tax cuts, but they don't want the chaos and the drama that comes with Trump. And Texas Republicans at high levels are starting to say this publicly. Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan publicly criticized Trump for midterm failures. Phelan pointed out that it was Trump's hand-picked candidates who underperformed and lost. Phelan said Republicans lost Senate control 3 cycles in a row. Phelan made clear that he was blaming Trump for failures, not taking the blame himself, which is a significant moment because Phelan is a top Texas Republican. Phelan is part of the establishment, and Phelan is publicly criticizing Trump. And then there are the grassroots reports. Reports from people who are organizing in Texas communities are starting to show that longtime MAGA activists are expressing frustration with Trump, that they feel betrayed by Trump's focus on personal issues instead of policy, that they're disappointed in Trump's handling of border security and inflation, that they're questioning whether Trump is actually delivering on what he promised, and that erosion of enthusiasm among grassroots MAGA activists is significant because grassroots enthusiasm is what drives turnout and volunteerism and campaign energy. And then there's the disaster response issue. Because the Central Texas floods were catastrophic, more than 100 people died, thousands lost their homes, the disaster response was critical and Trump had to respond to it. And in responding to it, Trump praised FEMA. Trump praised the federal government. Trump praised the disaster response. But earlier in his administration, Trump and his team had discussed gutting FEMA or shuttering it. So Trump had to suddenly defend the very agency he had previously threatened to destroy. And that gap between his earlier rhetoric and his current actions was on display for Texas voters to see. And that disaster also gave Texas voters a window into what actual governance looks like under Trump. It wasn't about campaign slogans and attacking critics. It was about practical response to a crisis. And Trump's record on disaster response was not good. Trump was defensive. Trump was dismissive of questions about emergency alert systems. Trump was more focused on spinning the narrative than on actually helping Texans. And that experience with Trump's actual governance, not his campaign rhetoric, is influencing how Texans are thinking about him. All right, so let's understand what this Texas erosion means for Trump's political future and for the broader political landscape. First, let's talk about what Texas has always meant to Trump, because Texas is supposed to be Trump's firewall. Texas is supposed to be the deep red fortress that stays Republican no matter what. Trump has always assumed that he can do anything, and Texas will still vote for him. Trump has always assumed that Texas is locked down, but if Texas is starting to slip, if Texas is starting to move away from Trump, that assumption is being challenged and the implications are significant because Texas is the second largest state by population. Texas has 39 electoral votes. Texas has a ton of House seats. Texas has huge influence on national politics. And if Trump can't dominate in Texas the way he used to, if Trump has to fight to hold Texas the way he used to take for granted, then Trump's path to the presidency gets much harder. Trump needs to win electoral votes. Trump needs to win districts. And if Texas is not the automatic blowout that it used to be, Trump has to work harder to win those electoral votes and those districts. And second, let's talk about the suburban erosion specifically, because the 31-point swing is coming from suburban and church-going voters. These are people who traditionally vote Republican. These are people who care about judges and tax cuts. These are people who are not natural Democratic voters, but they're moving away from Trump because they're tired of the chaos. They're tired of the drama. They're tired of the constant controversies. And they're deciding that they would rather have a different Republican messenger. They would rather have someone who delivers Republican policies without all the chaos. And that suburban erosion is exactly what killed Republican prospects in Georgia and Arizona. Republicans used to dominate those states. Republicans used to win by huge margins. But Trump alienated suburban voters with his rhetoric and his behavior, and suddenly Georgia and Arizona became purple. Suddenly, those states became competitive. Suddenly, Republicans had to fight to hold states they used to take for granted. And now that same dynamic might be happening in Texas. Suburbs that used to vote Republican are moving toward the Democrats or away from Trump. And that's a warning sign that Texas could be next if this trend continues. And third, let's talk about what other Republican leaders in Texas are thinking. Because Governor Greg Abbott and Senator Ted Cruz both have strong favorable ratings. Both have alternatives to Trump. Both have the ability to offer Texas Republicans a different choice. And if Abbott or Cruz decided to challenge Trump's dominance, they would have a base to build on. They would have the infrastructure, they would have the support of party establishment figures, and they might be able to break Trump's grip on Texas Republicans, which would be a significant political development. And fourth, let's talk about the grassroots level. Because MAGA energy is supposed to be Trump's biggest asset. MAGA activists are supposed to volunteer and phone bank and knock on doors and drive turnout. But if grassroots MAGA activists are losing enthusiasm for Trump, if they're feeling betrayed and frustrated, then that volunteer energy starts to disappear. And without that volunteer energy, without grassroots enthusiasm, Republican campaigns become harder to run. Republican candidates have to spend more money on things that MAGA volunteers used to do for free. And that's a significant operational problem. And fifth, let's talk about what this means for Trump's electoral path forward. Because Trump's entire strategy depends on dominating in red states and winning enough purple states to get to 270 electoral votes. But if Trump starts losing ground in red states like Texas, if Trump's margins shrink in states he's supposed to win by 20 points, then Trump's path to 270 becomes much harder. Trump needs every red state to be a sure thing. Trump needs to be able to win states like Texas by huge margins so he can focus resources on the purple states. But if Trump has to fight in Texas, if Trump has to spend money defending Texas, then Trump doesn't have those resources to spend in the purple states. And six, let's talk about down-ballot effects. Because if Trump support is eroding in Texas, that erodes support for every Republican running in Texas. House candidates, state legislative candidates, local candidates. They all benefit when Trump is running strong and energizing voters. But they all get hurt when Trump support erodes. And if Trump support is eroding in Texas, that makes every Republican seat in Texas more vulnerable. That makes House control more competitive. That makes state legislative control more competitive. And that's a significant problem for Republicans. And finally, let's talk about what this says about Trump's political brand. Because Trump's brand is built on invincibility. Trump's brand is built on the idea that he wins. Trump's brand is built on the idea that he dominates places like Texas and can do no wrong. But the evidence from Texas shows that's not true. The evidence shows that Trump is vulnerable. The evidence shows that Texas Republicans are open to alternatives. The evidence shows that Trump's dominance is not guaranteed. And once people start believing that Trump is vulnerable, once people start thinking that Trump might lose, that changes everything. Because political movements are built on the belief that their leader is winning. People follow leaders they think are winning. People abandon leaders they think are losing. And if Texas Republicans start believing that Trump is losing, if Texas Republicans start thinking that maybe they should look for alternatives, then Trump's entire movement could start to fracture. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, district by district, county by county, one voter at a time. And by the time Trump realizes what's happening, it might be too late. So the Texas erosion is significant, not just for what it says about Texas, but for what it says about Trump's political position nationally. If Trump is bleeding support in the supposed red fortress, then Trump is vulnerable everywhere. If Trump is having to fight in states he thought were locked down, then Trump's path to victory is much harder. And if Trump's support keeps eroding, if the suburban exodus accelerates, if the grassroots enthusiasm continues to decline, then Trump could find himself in a position where he's actually vulnerable in November, which would be an extraordinary political development. But the evidence from Texas suggests that's exactly where things are heading. And here's what makes the Texas situation particularly concerning for Trump operatives. Because Texas was supposed to be proof that Trump could never lose. Texas was supposed to be the state where Trump could face any scandal, any controversy, any legal problem, and still dominate. Texas was supposed to be Trump's safety net. But if Texas is no longer safe, then Trump doesn't have a safety net anymore. Then Trump is vulnerable everywhere. And the suburban erosion is particularly significant because those suburban voters used to be Republican strongholds. Those suburban voters used to be reliable Republican voters. They voted for Reagan. They voted for George W. Bush. They voted Republican because they believed in Republican policies. But Trump's style and rhetoric and behavior have driven them away. And once you lose voters like that, once you lose people who have been voting Republican for decades, getting them back is extremely difficult because they don't move for one election and then come back. They move and they stay moved. They find Democrats or independents who also support judges and tax cuts, and they don't come back. And that's exactly what happened in Georgia. Republicans dominated Georgia for years. Republicans could count on Georgia as a safe state. But Trump's behavior and rhetoric drove suburban voters away, and suddenly Georgia was a swing state. Suddenly Democrats were competitive in Georgia, and Republicans lost Georgia because they lost the suburbs. And if that same dynamic is happening in Texas, if the same pattern is repeating itself, then Texas could become a swing state too. And that would be a political catastrophe for Republicans because Republicans need a safe, deep red map. Republicans need to be able to count on states like Texas and Florida to deliver consistent Republican votes, so Republicans can compete in the purple states. But if Texas starts becoming purple, if Texas starts becoming competitive, then Republicans lose that safe base. Then Republicans have to compete everywhere. Then Republicans can't win. And that's exactly the situation that Trump's behavior is creating. And the evangelicals are particularly significant here because evangelicals have been the core of Trump's support. Evangelicals overlook Trump's personal behavior because they believed he would deliver judges. Evangelicals overlook Trump's rhetoric because they believed he would advance their values. But now evangelicals in Texas are saying they're tired of it. Evangelicals are saying Trump is spiritually damaging. Evangelicals are saying Trump hurts their values more than he helps them. And once evangelicals start moving away from Trump, Trump loses a huge portion of his base. Because evangelicals are not just voters. Evangelicals are volunteers. Evangelicals are donors. Evangelicals are the infrastructure that makes Trump's campaigns run. And the fact that evangelicals in Texas are expressing concern about Trump is a warning sign that evangelicals nationwide might be having the same concerns. That evangelicals are starting to ask whether Trump is actually good for Christianity or whether Trump has corrupted Christianity. And that's a profound shift if it's happening. That's a fundamental challenge to Trump's base if evangelicals start moving away. And the disaster response issue is significant too. Because Texas voters saw how Trump actually governs when there's a real crisis. Texas voters saw Trump being defensive and dismissive when they were dealing with devastation and death. Texas voters saw the gap between Trump's small government rhetoric and the reality that they needed federal help. Texas voters saw Trump praising FEMA while his administration was trying to dismantle it. And that reality check is influencing how Texas voters think about Trump. Because in normal times, voters can ignore the gap between campaign rhetoric and actual governance. Voters can support a president who talks one way but governs another way. But when there's a real crisis, when people are dying, when people are losing their homes, when people need help, then that gap becomes obvious. Then voters see what their president actually does instead of what he says. And in this case, Texas voters saw Trump being inadequate. And that shapes how they're thinking about him going forward. So the Texas erosion is real. The Texas shift is happening. And the implications are serious, not just for Texas, but for Trump's entire political future. Because if Trump can't hold Texas, then Trump is in trouble. And the evidence suggests that Trump might not be able to hold Texas. The evidence suggests that Texas is moving away from Trump. And that's a signal that should terrify anyone who depends on Trump's political dominance. And pay attention to what happens next in Texas. Pay attention to whether more Texas Republicans publicly criticize Trump. Pay attention to whether the suburban swing continues. Pay attention to whether evangelical support holds or continues to erode. Because Texas is the canary in the coal mine. Texas is the warning sign. And if Texas continues to move away from Trump, then other states will follow. Then the supposed red wall will crumble. Then Trump's entire political position will be threatened. And that moment might be starting right now in Texas. And that moment would represent a fundamental shift in American politics. Because Trump's entire political strategy has been built on the assumption that he owns the Republican Party. Trump's strategy has been built on the assumption that he can do anything and Republicans will still follow him. Trump's strategy has been built on the assumption that states like Texas will always be his. But if that assumption is wrong, if that foundation is cracking, then everything changes. Then Trump might actually be vulnerable. Then Trump might actually face real political consequences for his behavior. And Texas conservatives understand this. That's why they're starting to speak up. That's why they're starting to voice concerns publicly. They understand that the current trajectory is unsustainable. They understand that continuing down this path leads to losses. They understand that Trump might not be good for Republican electoral prospects, and they're starting to act on that understanding. Texas, Trump's supposedly safest red fortress, is showing signs of erosion, with cracks appearing in what he assumed was guaranteed MAGA territory. If the red wall starts crumbling there, Trump has no safety net left, and the political earthquake could reshape everything.